Hello my friends, so as you probably know, continuous video autofocus of Panasonic Micro Four Thirds cameras is certainly not great, but in this video I will share with you some tips on how to make it work and how to get the best possible results while using autofocus on Panasonic cameras. So there are basically two things affecting what results you can get with autofocus on Panasonic Micro Four Thirds cameras, and those are the settings and the way how you use the camera. It is definitely important to know how the settings work, but in 9 months of using Panasonic G80 or G85, I learned that much more important is how I use the camera. So let's quickly go over the settings and then I will explain how to use autofocus to get the best possible results. I will go over the settings on Panasonic G85, but some of these are also in other Panasonic cameras. So first of all, we have the AF sensitivity. You can find this setting in G85 in custom settings, and it is item 3 on page 9. Personally, I leave it on +2 all the time. The difference between -2 and +2 is actually not that significant in my experience. It helps a bit to have it at +2. If you feel that it is hunting too much at +2, you may try 0, but that wasn't the case with my G85. Then there are AF modes. Here I mostly use 2 of those, the 49 area and 1 area. I will talk about face tracking in separate video, and there is also custom multi-area, but personally I haven't found any reason to set it up and to use it. My most favorite setting is 1 area. I usually use the smallest focus square, and most of the time I have it placed in the center of the frame, and then I can move it using the touchscreen at any time. The advantage of this mode is that you are telling the camera where to focus, so the camera isn't confused that much, and it can use all of the processing power to figure out just how far should it focus. It also gives you more control over the focusing, because the camera sometimes just won't be able to figure out where do you want it to focus. For example, here I was using 49 area. I wanted it to focus on that white building, but it didn't even try to do that because it thought that I want to have the wall in the focus. I mostly use 49 area where there isn't anything particular that I need in focus, for example for some landscape panning or while shooting the road from car. When I need particular part of the frame to be in focus, I use 1 area. For example, I've always used 1 area while shooting reviews of wristwatches for my other channel, and generally if you want the fastest and the most accurate autofocus, 1 area is the way to go. When I need to track subject across the frame, I use tracking mode. In my testing, it has proved to be a bit better than 49 area in those situations. And now let's talk about how to actually use the autofocus. Generally, the autofocus fails if the situation in the frame changes significantly or quickly. That applies for changing the subject in focus, keeping focus while zooming in and out, and for tracking as well. So the key is to avoid these situations as much as possible or edit around them. Of course, this may limit your options, but it is what it is. There's a couple of specific situations that would be ideal to avoid while using autofocus. Most notably, it is focusing from very close distance to long distance. That is really an Achilles heel of this system. In such situation, it will be slow and it will hunt a lot. It doesn't really matter what mode are you in. In my recent test, 1 area wasn't much better than 49 area in this situation. Here I used my watch as a close subject, and it actually isn't so terrible because the watch provides contrast in the frame, so it is easier for the camera to figure out where and when should it focus. And that is actually another tip. If you are in such situation, like for example in beauty videos or unboxing videos, try to provide some contrast for the camera so that it knows where to focus, but of course I understand that it is not possible all the time. When you are focusing, for example, from 1.5 meters almost to infinity, the autofocus actually works reasonably well, as you can see in this sample. It isn't super fast and it cannot match hybrid AF in Sony A6500 or dual pixel in Canon 80D, for example, but it is quite alright in my opinion. Another tip would be to use deeper depth of field and wide angle. The idea here is to make it easier for the camera to focus within some range. So for example, here is quite extreme sample of this. This is shot at 7mm with aperture set to f8. And as you can see here, focusing from the tree to those buildings is really easy for the camera because those buildings are almost in focus even when the camera is focusing on the tree. Or on this footage from my A6500 trip to Bali video, it works well even in this difficult situation because it is shot at wide angle. Actually, at those wide angles, autofocus is much less of a problem generally, but if you get it into really difficult situation, like if you wanted to focus from very close to long focal distance, it will still perform poorly. So generally, I recommend avoiding shallow depth of field while using autofocus, and if you really want to use shallow depth of field, make sure that there is contrast between the background and your subject. Another problematic situation for autofocus in Panasonic cameras is low light. This is a problem with every contrast-based autofocus system. The problem in low light is that the autofocus is not only slow, but it also starts to hunt in Nikon style. So it starts focusing without reason while you are panning, for example. It is actually not as bad as I thought it would be on Panasonic G85. For example, in this sample it works quite well. It is mostly a significant problem in extreme situations, like in this sample. There isn't really a particular solution of this problem. Using a lens with wider aperture will actually help, because then the sensor has more light coming in while using the same shutter speed. Fortunately, there are some affordable f1.7 lenses for Micro Four Thirds, like Panasonic 15, 20 and 25mm, so investing in those might be a good idea if you intend to use the camera in low light situations, although it also makes the depth of field shallower, so it is a bit of catch-22. Next tip is also linked to the previous tip, and that is avoiding busy backgrounds. Here the camera just thinks that I wanted to focus on the synthetic flower in the center in 49 area setting, and even when I move the lens it won't focus on it. Here the tracking actually works quite well. When I try it with 49 area setting against the plain background, it will focus on the lens even in the corners of the frame. That brings us to the last tip. While shooting the last video, I wanted the camera to focus on my A6500 in front of the synthetic flowers, but it was really confused and it couldn't keep the focus on the camera because there was too much going on in a frame. So I've just used the autofocus to focus once on the camera, and then I switched it to manual focus while keeping the subject in the same distance from the camera. So if circumstances allow it, it is also a good technique. So to sum up this video, in my experience, how you actually use the camera is more important than the autofocus settings. You really want to avoid focusing from very close distance to long distance. If you really need to do this, try to provide some contrast on your subject to let the camera know where to focus. Autofocus works better if the depth of field is deeper. If you need shallow depth of field, again you need to provide some contrast to your subject. In low light the autofocus gets slower and it also starts hunting. Using lens with wider aperture might help. It is also a good idea to avoid busy backgrounds, and if the camera hunts a lot, you can focus on the subject once, switch to manual focus and keep constant distance from the subject. So that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. I hope that you liked this video and that you found it to be useful. Stay tuned for more videos and maybe consider subscribing if you don't want to miss my future content. I appreciate your feedback in form of thumbs up or thumbs down. If you would like to ask anything or share your opinion, please do so in the comment section, and see you next time.